Okay, let's get started. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Good Shabbos, everybody. I'd like to begin. In case those of you who don't know me, I'm Ron Friedman. I'm filling in for Rabbi Huva, who's out of town tonight for a bar mitzvah. And since nobody's sitting in the front seat, and since I'm isolated from you all, is there anybody here who would object to my doing this without a mask? I've been fully vaccinated since March, and I had a negative COVID test yesterday. Anybody object? Raise your hand. Okay. This will be easier. You'll be able to hear me better. Okay, let's start with Hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Kol neshama hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol neshama hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Let's begin on page 1 at the bottom of the page, reading responsively. God has a dream. If we could but recognize our common humanity, that we do not, that our destinies are bound up in one another, that we can be free only together, that we can strive only together, that we can be human only together, then a glorious world would come into being. Page 2, Shiru Chadash, Shir Chadash. Shiru Ladonai Kol Haaretz. Shiru Ladonai Shir Chadash. Sing unto God all the earth a new song. I will sing unto God a new song. Sing unto God and we'll all sing. All the earth a new song unto God. Shiru Ladonai Kol Haaretz. Shiru Ladonai Shir Chadash. On page 3, let's read The Path of Freedom responsively. You took us out of the darkness so that your light might dwell among us.
You showed us your power to bring down the powerful, uplift the enslaved, transform the social order.
You showed us your strength so we might remember our own.
We carry the Exodus vision wherever we go, lest we forget our sense of liberation, lest we lose the joy of breathing free, lest we grow indifferent and blind to others' pain.
So long as we work to make you present, we walk the path of life and freedom. But if we forget to bring you into this world, then we return to darkness. I'd like to call up Andrea, who used to be a member of Ormi a long time ago, who's in town tonight to do the Shabbat candle lighting.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shal Shabbos.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'chad likner shel Shabbat. At this time, we invite anyone who would like to share some happy event of the past week to share it with the congregation. Anybody?
Well, I mentioned this before, but since my grandson's here, he then got into UVA school architecture.
Oh, okay, welcome.
And there's another new member whose daughter is also third-year student, I believe.
My grandson started UVA.
There you go.
And I also went to UVA in architecture.
And then I have one more thing. Not to leave out my other grandson, that won the it's 8 and under Little League team, won the North Carolina State Championship.
Wow, wow.
And he went to Florida for double elimination.
Anyone else?
My birthday is on Tuesday.
Happy birthday. All right, in celebration of these happy events, let's sing Shechechianu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Shechechianu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Shechechianu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh Okay, on page 6, we have the poem, The New Colossus. And for those of you who don't know about this, it's a poem written by the Jewish social activist Emma Lazarus, and it's the plaque that appears at the bottom of the Statue of Liberty. So let's all read this together. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land, here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. A long time ago, but not too long ago, ships came from across the sea, bringing the pilgrims and prayer makers, adventurers and booty seekers, free men and indentured servants, slave men and slave masters, all new to a new world, America. With billowing sails, the galleons came, bringing men and dreams, women and dreams. In little bands together, heart reaching out to heart, hand reaching out to hand, they began to build our land. Some were free hands, seeking a greater freedom. Some were indentured hands, hoping to find their freedom. Some were slave hands, guarding in their hearts the seed of freedom. But the word was always there, freedom. Let's sing Lecha Dodi on page 7. Lecha Dodi likrat chala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat chala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi, Lecha Dodi likrat chala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat chala, Shabbat Kabbalah. Shamur v'zachor b'dibur echad. Hishmi'anu echam yuchad. Adonai echad u'shemo echad. L'shem tiferet b'litilah. L'cha dodi. L'cha dodi l'krat kalam. B'nei Shabbat Kabbalah. L'cha dodi l'krat kalam. B'nei Shabbat Kabbalah. L'krat Shabbat l'chu v'necha. Kimim kor ha-bracha. Rosh mikedem nisufa. Sef ma'aseh b'mashlach halah. L'cha dodi. L'cha dodi l'krat kalam. B'nei Shabbat Kabbalah. L'cha dodi l'krat kalam. B'nei Shabbat Kabbalah. He Torah-ri, kiva ore, kumi ore, uri, shir daberi, kavod Adonai alaych nigla. L'cha dodi l'krat kalam. B'nei Shabbat Kabbalah. L'cha dodi l'krat kalam. B'nei Shabbat Kabbalah. All please rise and face the entrance. Bo'hi v'shalom aterech hala. Gam b'simcha v'b'sachala. Tov emunei am segula. Bo'hi chala, bo'hi chala. L'cha dodi. L'cha dodi l'krat kalam. B'nei Shabbat Kabbalah. L'cha dodi l'krat kalam. B'nei Shabbat Kabbalah. Everybody can remain standing for the Baruch Hu. May be seated. Let's all read Ma'ariv Aravim at the top of page 9. Freedom. It isn't once to walk out under the Milky Way, feeling the rivers of light, the fields of dark. Freedom is daily, prose-bound, routine, remembering, putting together inch by inch the starry worlds from all the lost collections. Baruch atah Adonai Amariv Aravim. At the bottom of page 9, this is one of my favorite poems by Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting for their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Would everyone please rise for the Shema on page 10? Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. 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 Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto L'olam Va'ed. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto L'olam Va'ed. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Please be seated. Let's read the Ahavta. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol modecha v'hayu devarim ha'eleh asher anochi mitzavacha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha v'lechtecha v'derech v'shafpecha v'kumecha v'kishartam liot al yadecha v'hayu l'totafot bein einecha v'shaftam amazuzot beitecha v'visharecha l'man tizkaru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'yitem kadoshim le'elohechem Ani Adonai Elohechem Asher hotzeiti etechem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'Elohim Ani Adonai Elohechem. And then on page 12, let's sing all three paragraphs of Micha Mocha for a change. Let's continue with Vishamru on page 14. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et Hashabbat lasot et Hashabbat l'dorotam berit olam. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et Hashabbat lasot et Hashabbat l'dorotam berit olam. v'niuvein b'nei Israel, od hi le'olam, v'shamru b'nei Israel et ha-Shabbat לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי ששת שנים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביום השני שבת ויהי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. On page 16, let's rise for the Amidah. Please be seated and take a moment for personal prayer or reflection. Shalom Rav on page 18. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Olam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Olam. Ki atahu melech Adon lecho shalom. Ki atahu melech Adon lecho shalom. Tasim leolam. Shalom Rav. Tasim leolam. V'tov beinecha levarech et amcha Yisrael. V'chol eitu v'chol sha'ah bishlomecha. Shalom Rav Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Tasim leolam. Tasim leolam. At this time in our service, we pray for the complete healing of body and spirit for the following people: Beth Levine, Rabbi Jerry Levy, Jean Sanders, Sue Shires, Elsa Friedman, and is there anyone else to add to the list? Grace?
Angela Wichita.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, and we also add to our prayers tonight the millions of people throughout the world suffering from COVID, and we also ask for strength for their loved ones and their caregivers. Let's sing Misha Beirach on page 21. Misha Beirach Avoteinu Makor HaBracha Imotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Misha Beirach Imotenu Makor HaBracha Avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shalema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen. At this point in our service, we usually have the Torah service, but as the rabbi's not here tonight, instead I'll just deliver a Devar Torah on this week's Torah portion. My remarks will be a little longer than those of the rabbi, but I'll be as brief as I can on this very interesting and important Torah portion. I've timed it at 15 minutes, so I hope it'll be worth your while. As we approach Rosh Hashanah, we're halfway through the fifth and final book of the Torah. The fifth book is called Devarim, which means words. Its Greek name eventually became the English name Deuteronomy, meaning the second law, or more clearly, the repetition of the law. Devarim is sort of a summary book of all the most important ideas in the previous books. This week's Torah portion is called Shoftim, which means judges. As usual, many topics are packed into a Torah portion. Tonight, I'll focus on some important concepts of Jewish law. I'm not a lawyer, so this won't be technical, but by the end of these comments, I hope you'll have an idea of the ways in which Jewish law originated and developed into the current legal system in Israel, and how that system differs from the American legal system. First, to the history of Jewish law. 7 weeks after the Exodus, the Israelites are nearing Mount Sinai. Yitro, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, has heard of the Exodus, and journeys from Midian to deliver Moshe's wife Zipporah and their 2 sons, Gershom and Eleazar. What Yitro observes in the much earlier Torah portion, Exodus, that bears his name, is the Israelites literally standing in line from morning until evening, waiting for Moses to adjudicate their disputes. This is before the giving of the law. Yitro gives some fatherly advice to Moshe. Son, you are going to wear yourself out if you try to settle every dispute yourself. You need to make known the law, and then choose capable, trustworthy, God-fearing men to serve as judges, settling only the most difficult cases yourself. Each piece of Yitro's advice is important. The law has to be known to those who are to obey it. Judges need to be capable, trustworthy, take their responsibilities seriously, and be committed to applying the law impartially. All of this is emphasized in Shoftim 40 years later, as Moshe approaches both the promised land and the end of his life. Moshe takes Yitro's advice and establishes a system of judges to settle disputes. Then he goes up the mountain to receive the law and to give it to the people so that they understand what is expected of them. Moses is forever after known as the lawgiver. Jewish law defines normative Judaism, both what is and what is not. It defines Judaism as monotheistic. We believe in one God who is spirit, a being who is not embodied, and who expects us to behave in a loving way towards our parents, our children, the widow, the orphan, our neighbors, and the stranger. Children cannot be sold into slavery or prostitution. Children must be educated and must be taught how to swim. Parents must be shown respect. It commands not only the use of uniforms, weights, and measures, and tells us such naughty things as who we can have sexual relationships with and not. The law sets in place the wholly radical idea of Shabbat, that everyone deserves a day of rest in every 7. This was at a time when the poor worked all the time and the rich worked little. It commands that we always remember the beauty of the creation and the fact that we were once slaves in Egypt. There's no mention of the immortality of the soul or the idea of reincarnation. It establishes the idea that no one is above the law. Later in Jewish history, after King David lusts after Bathsheba, another man's wife, and sends her husband into battle in such a way as to ensure his death so that he can marry her, Jewish legend has it that King David is forced to copy an entire Torah to remind himself that he is not above the law. And he is further denied his greatest dream, to replace the portable tabernacle, the Mishkan, with a permanent structure, the first temple that is eventually built by his son, Solomon. The law also defines what Judaism is not. No belief in astrology, no worshiping of the sun or moon or stars, no making and worshiping of idols, no divination of the future through examining the entrails or blood of animals, no consultation with witches or with the dead, no household shrines, no veneration of relics, no tarot reading, no ideas of salvation and redemption in the later Christian senses. The idea behind having written laws is as old as human nature. Moshe was not the first lawgiver, and a lot of Jewish law came from earlier legal systems. Humans are unruly and capricious and self-serving by nature. It's our nature to favor those we like or love or who look like us, or who might give us something we want in return. We all want to do exactly as we please. The solution to this innate prejudice is a system of laws applied impartially. Most of us recognize that if we are going to live in orderly, peaceful, and productive societies, we need laws, and we need to obey them for the common good. Our conviction is that if we teach our children how to behave in a reasonable way, and if we ourselves do the same, then we will create a better society. Behavior gets internalized, and eventually behaving in a good way becomes as natural as our natural state of selfishness. This is the hope of ethical education, that we can create a civilization of cooperative people. There are always differences of opinion because each of us looks at the world differently. We are witnessing this in a big way right now during the COVID pandemic. Some see wearing masks and taking vaccines as a commonplace, common sense way of protecting oneself, those one loves, and our neighbors. Some see it as a small sacrifice of personal freedom for the common good. On the other hand, there are those who protest that requiring masks or vaccination impinges too much on their personal freedom. This tension varies profoundly within communities and around the world. Optimists believe that humans can become civilized and can be happy working towards the common good. The great doctor and essayist Lewis Thomas pointed out that humans are a very young species, barely in adolescence, and expressed his optimism that we would get better as we mature. Next, I would like to comment briefly on the concept of lex talionis, the law of retribution, set forth in the book of Exodus. Borrowed from earlier Babylonian law and embedded in many societies, particularly in the East, it is commonly known as the law of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It's the idea that injury to another should be punished by a like injury to the perpetrator. There's no evidence that this was literally carried out in Judaism, and it is generally considered to be an insistence that punishment fit the crime, and usually solved by financial restitution. There are a lot of acts in Torah that order the death penalty, so I want to comment on that for a bit. Likely, every one of us sitting here tonight is in traditional violation of the Sabbath because we drove cars here or rode with someone else, and we are using electricity and microphones. All of these are Sabbath violations of the type that in ancient days would have merited the death penalty. Enemies of Judaism delight in pointing out the many crimes in the Jewish Bible for which the death penalty was prescribed, but there is no evidence that such executions were widely carried out. Rabbis were extremely squeamish about invoking the death penalty. They mostly looked at it as a prescription as an indication of how seriously a violation of a law was to be taken. So early on, the rabbis imposed so many conditions on the use of the death penalty as to eliminate it almost entirely. For instance, even for the act of murder to result in a death sentence, the crime needed to be observed by two disinterested and reputable witnesses. And the witnesses had to warn the murderer beforehand of the consequences of his actions. Over 2,000 years ago, Rabbi Elazar ben Azara said that a court sentencing to death even one person in 70 years would be considered a murderous court. And Rabbi Tarfan and Rabbi Akiva said that no defendant should ever be executed. Every movement in Judaism today is on record as being opposed to the death penalty. Modern Israel does not have a death penalty. The last person to be executed in Israel was a non-citizen, the Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann. He was kidnapped in Argentina in 1960, where he was hiding, stood trial in Israel for genocide and for crimes against humanity, was convicted, and was executed in 1962. For the crime of murder in Israel today, a mandatory sentence of 20 to 30 years in prison is imposed, with parole usually after 14 to 20 years. Unlike in the United States, in Israel, one cannot be convicted of murder by confessing the crime. DNA testing in recent years has proven that many confessions in the U.S. that led to long prison sentences or to execution were false confessions. In Israel, also, one cannot be convicted on the basis of circumstantial evidence or if one suffers from mental health problems. Now, a few notes on the Israeli judicial system. There are no jury trials in Israel. Every trial is by judges, usually by a single judge. There are 3 types of court systems: civil, criminal, and military. Usually, after hearing the case, the decision is made by the single judge, but in case of serious crimes, such as murder, by 3 judges. All appeals courts consist of 3 judges. In Israel, as in the United States, the accused has the right to remain silent, but this is normally not the case in Israel. In Israel, remaining silent during trial is so rare as to be newsworthy. The Israeli Supreme Court has 15 judges. Each judge, whom we would call a justice, technically is appointed by the President of Israel, but it is done so on the recommendation of a non-political judicial selection committee composed of members of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. The Supreme Court of Israel elects its own equivalent of Chief Justice, called the President of the Court. The current Israeli equivalent of our Chief Justice is a woman named Esther Hayut, who will retire in 2024. Justices serve until the mandatory retirement age of 70, or until they resign earlier or are removed from office for cause. Judges may not be removed for political reasons. The court makes decisions based on precedent, as in most judicial systems in democracies. Convictions under the Israeli system depend on the presentation of evidence and upon the testimony of witnesses. So important are witnesses throughout Jewish history that the 9th of the famous 10 Commandments specifically forbids false witness. As in other democracies, the Israeli judicial system subscribes to the ideal of equal application of law to every person. Although not used in Israel due to the commandment prohibiting graven images, since the 16th century, the impartial application of law has been symbolized by Lady Justice, a blindfolded woman carrying a sword and a set of scales. This was based on the ancient Greek goddess of Themis, the goddess of wisdom and good counsel, an interpreter of the God's will. The word Themis means order, an embodiment of the idea that equal application of justice leads to an orderly and just society. These ideals of fair and equal administration of the law, without corruption, favor, greed, or prejudice, have been embodied in Jewish law since the time of Moses and are emphasized in this week's Torah portion. In closing, I want to comment on the most famous line of this Torah portion, Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof, translated as justice. Justice shall you pursue. This commandment hung on the wall of the office of the late and great American Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg for all of her days. Although Tzedek is translated as justice in this instance and is repeated for emphasis, it is also the root of the Jewish word for charity, tzedakah, tzedek, tzedakah. This indicates a difference of Jewish outlook from many other faiths. In Judaism, charity does not result from a warm feeling for another person, although that may be present, but from the idea of justice. Everyone is born with different abilities and into different circumstances, so the giving of charity is not mostly a matter of feeling, it is a commitment to the idea of justice. This is important to remember when giving charity, that it is fundamentally an act of justice. The idea of pursuing justice is also an important one. It is different from the idea of just acting in a just way. Torah commands us not just to be honest in our dealings and to be law-abiding, but to pursue justice. This means that each of us is commanded to take actions in our lives to right the wrongs that we see in the world. Among other things, this has led to Jews having been active in the civil rights movement, in the gay rights movement, and in the Innocence Project, and in the Southern Poverty Law Center working for racial justice. If we cannot do this work ourselves, our obligation is to support organizations and political candidates whom we feel will actively pursue justice. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Please rise for Aleinu. May be seated. Before we say the mourner's Kaddish, I'd like everyone to read together the poem Give Me Away on page 23. When I die, give what's left of me away to children and to old men that wait to die. And if you need to cry, cry for your brother walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give them what you need to give to me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known or loved, and if you cannot give me away, at least let me live in your eyes and not in your mind. You can love me best by letting hands touch hands and by letting go of children that need to be free. Die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. Let's see. This week we remember Matthew Negro, stepfather of Alyssa Freeman, who's in the Shaloshim period. And we remember the yahrzeits of Julie Blankford, niece of Guinea Engler, Joseph Levine, father-in-law of Beth Levine, Jules Levine, father of David Levine, Dorothy Simon Shemanskin, mother of Ron Shemanskin, Rabbi Levi Smolar, former rabbi of Orami, and the husband of Marcia Penn. We also observe the yahrzeit of Grace Lyday, family member of Nicole Rossi. Are there any more names we'd like to add to the Kaddish list tonight? If not, could we all please rise for the mourner's Kaddish on page 24. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah v'alma divrach hirutei v'amlich malchutei b'chayechun uv'yumechun v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael ba'agala uv'izman kariv v'yimru amen. Yehei shemei rabbah mavorach leolam omei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kudashah b'richu La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran bi'alma v'yimru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. May the memories of our deceased loved ones be a blessing among the living, and let us say amen. Please be seated. Laurie, do you have some announcements?
Shabbat Shalom. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Lori Weinberg, President of Congregation Orami, and I welcome all of you who are members and those of you who are visiting either in person or virtually. I want to thank Ron for stepping in for the rabbi who is at a family bat mitzvah this weekend in North Carolina, and as a result of that, there will be no Torah study tomorrow. That will resume next Saturday. I think a lot of people have been wondering what's going to happen with regards to the High Holy Days this year, so I wanted to just take a couple of minutes to share with you where we are at this point in time. As you know, this has been a very, very difficult and ever-changing world with the COVID virus, and it has led us to make some very difficult decisions. But each time we have made a decision, we have tried to keep the safety of everyone in mind when reaching these decisions. As a result, this year we will not be having services at the JCC. We will be having services here at Orami. In a sad break with tradition, it will be limited to Orami members only who have been vaccinated, and there will be a sign-up procedure in place so that we can adequately separate and limit the number of people in attendance. Of course, our services will continue to be held virtually, and those are open to anyone in the community that would like to attend, and those people who would feel safer and more comfortable taking part in the services from home this year. So I ask you to please look for information in the weekly update. There will be a sign-up Genius link this week, and you are going to be asked if you would like to come in person to one of the services, to choose one of the services that you would like to attend. We will keep it open for 2 weeks. At that time, we will close it, and if there are remaining spaces, we will open it up again, and so people might be able to sign up for more than one service. Finally, there will be family services for both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Those are open to everyone in the community. They will be held outdoors. There will be an RSVP system in place, and that's mainly so that the rabbi can have an idea of how many people will be here, because she has some activities planned that require purchasing supplies and so on. So on that note, hopefully next year, this is how I felt this year, that we would be in a very different place this year. But I'm holding out hope that next year we will be back to a much more normal situation, and I appreciate everyone's understanding during these difficult times. Shabbat Shalom.
Let's see, our closing songs tonight are on the handout sheet, which has page 32 at the bottom. First, we're going to sing Oseh Shalom, and then we're going to sing Eli, Eli. And after that, I think I'm going to go back to the table in the classroom, and I'll say the blessings. I'll put my mask back on. We'll all say the blessings over wine and bread, and then we'll take the wine and bread. Anybody who wants to take wine and bread can go outside and eat it. Is that right? Yes? Okay. All right. On page 32 of the separate sheet, Oseh Shalom. Oseh Shalom bimroma uyaseh Shalom aleim ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Oseh Shalom Shalom Aleinu V'Yakol V'Yakol Israel V'Yimamel Amen. And Eli, Eli at the very bottom. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
feel if it's a safe place.
Oh, they're almost out.
Yeah. One of them is pretty.
I think there's supposed to be time for 3 hours.
Doesn't the design,
Do we let these burn down or do we put them out?
I think we put them out.
I would think so, but, is there a special way we do it?
The person who needs the service has to stay until we